Okay, good evening. The Design Review Board meeting of February 13th, 2014 is called to order. Please refrain from talking amongst yourselves and please turn off or put on vibrate all cell phones and pagers at this time. If you need to talk, please leave the meeting room. Anyone who wishes to speak, including applicants, is asked to completely fill out one of the speaker cards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff. Anyone who wishes to be re-noticed about a project must completely fill out one of the postcards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff to receive notice of subsequent meetings. Current Design Review Board agendas are available by visiting our website at www.ci.glendale.ca.us. A handout describing the procedures of the meeting, possible board decisions, and Design Review Board appeals is available at the table by the front door. Please note that all appeals must be filed within 15 calendar days of the Design Review Board decision date. The chairperson may reorder agenda items at his or her discretion. In terms of roll call, Board Member Mardian.
Here.
Board Member Malikian.
Here.
Board Member Palmer.
Here.
Board Member Sarkisian.
Here.
And Chairman Simonian.
Here.
Report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on the bulletin board outside City Hall at or before 5 p.m. on February 4th, 2014. Oral communications discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. I have no oral communication cards, and I don't believe any were turned in.
Nope, I don't have any either.
Which brings us to the first item on today's agenda, which would be the election of a new chairperson. So, it's a new year, and all 5 board members are present. Would anyone care to make a motion to nominate a new chairperson?
I'll nominate Judy Palmer.
I'll second that.
And I'll nominate Rich.
Well, because there's already a motion and a second, essentially...
Oh, was a second? I didn't hear.
Well, if the,
There
if
was
the,
a-
no- if
there
the
was-
nominee demurs, maybe we don't have to.
Pardon?
Are you doing that because you're not interested in?
Are you
No,
not
I
interested in
just-
serving?
I didn't hear a second.
Being
and I was-
courteous.
Oh,
I see. Okay.
You don't have to blush.
would you care to accept the nomination?
That's fine with me.
Okay, so since there was a motion and a second, just go through roll call. Board Member Mardian?
Yes.
Board Member Malikian?
Yes.
Board Member Palmer?
Yes, I guess.
Board Member Sarkisian?
Yes.
And Chairman Simonian?
Yes.
The motion passes, and so does the gavel as well to our new chairperson, Ms. Palmer. And I'd like to also thank very much Mr. Simonian for your year as chair of the Design Review Board.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. So,
Should we actually switch
No,
seats?
because I'd like to recommend that Mr. Simonian remain as chairman because I have to recuse myself on the project that's coming up.
thank you.
Okay.
So, back, we can
okay.
switch.
If you're welcome to do that, or we can just start you as office chair at the next meeting,
That's
however you
fine.
wish.
That's perfect.
Do I get to sit here for one last time?
This will be your last Design Review Board meeting as chair. So, all right, great, thank you.
Somebody decided you weren't going to be here. You know.
I know. You see, they already got rid of the sign.
We don't do a co-chair.
The sign was right there.
Okay.
Someone knew.
And I pushed it over you.
Actually, I think Mr. Simonian, I think your nameplate's missing too.
That's what we're
That's
saying.
what we're trying to.
Is there a nameplate for Mr. Simonian?
But I
They
actually
auctioned
moved
it off.
Okay, no, we will.
You're already
That
obsolete.
nameplate will be
See how
found.
quickly things change.
Okay.
Right. Yesterday's news.
No, it's going to be fun right now. Under the Design Review Board agenda, we had 2 cases on this evening's. Oh, here it comes right now.
There you go.
Thank you.
You just haven't made.
Thank you, Manoush.
Okay, under tonight's agenda, there were actually 2 cases. One of those cases was not properly noticed on site, so that matter had to be continued to the next date certain for the next hearing, which would be case number PDR 1328247. That is 3726 2nd Avenue. So it will be continued without any additional further public notice to the next DRB date in March. I apologize. February 27th. I apologize. It's continued to a date certain, which would be February 27th, so in 2 weeks. The next case on tonight's agenda is case number PDR 1329031. The project is located at 2811 Manhattan Avenue, and Board Member Palmer unfortunately does have to recuse herself because she was the landscape architect for the project.
Okay.
So, record will note that she is actually leaving the hearing room.
Okay.
And which brings us to staff's presentation. I happen to be the case planner, so if you would allow me to come up to the board. Okay. One more speaker card.
Okay.
Okay, this case involves the
Very quickly, did
Yes.
we already mention the case number? Did we open up with the case number? Or-
I don't think we did.
Okay, good.
Did you?
Case number and the case address.
Okay.
Is that all right?
If you mentioned it, it's absolutely okay with me. Go ahead.
All right. Okay, so this particular project involves the construction of a new one-story, approximately 1,900 square foot single-family residence and an attached two-car garage on a triangular-shaped, approximately 7,000 square foot lot zoned R1 single-family residential floor area District 2. The project site currently has an old pool house, an old pool. Those structures will be demolished as part of this proposal. The demolition was evaluated several years ago. This particular project site previously had a case that was submitted back in 2008. It never went forward, but at that point in time, the demolition was evaluated and it was found not to be a historical resource per CEQA as well. So, noted. There is, I should note that there's one existing oak tree on the site, and there are several oak trees to the rear on the adjacent site, one large pine tree on the corner of Manhattan and La Crescenta. If the site looks familiar, obviously, the Design Review Board reviewed the two previous site single-family residential dwellings, both facing Manhattan, or I should say La Crescenta at 4025, and also the 2801 Manhattan that was actually on the corner of Manhattan and La Crescenta. Both of these new single-family dwellings were approved back in 2013. This is the last remaining site of the three parcels. The same developer is developing this particular site. And as you'll notice, it is triangular in shaped. They have a two-car garage that faces Manhattan Avenue. The interior property lines, because of the angle of the slope, is staggered backwards. It is a three-bedroom house. The living room and family room take advantage of that small piece of the triangular lot as their rear yard, and because of the site constraints, meaning that it's triangular in shape, the existing oak tree and whatnot, the site plan is constrained, and basically this would be the building footprint of the lot. In terms of mass and scale, the one-story structure with an overall height approximately, I believe it's at 20, just under 20 feet. The elevation drawings don't have it here. Now, the board, in its previous discussions for the two other single-family dwellings, some comments were made that this would be appropriate only as a one-story structure. There were also comments made by the neighbors as well that due to the existing neighborhood characteristics along Manhattan Avenues, a one-story would be appropriate. The developer has come in with a one-story proposal. So, mass and scale, it fits within the neighborhood. Last but not least, the house has been designed in a craftsman style. It has siding. You'll notice here, siding also, they've incorporated river rock from off the site and from the existing structure. You also have clip gabled roofs to better help the overall mass and scale, to sort of tone down. There had been a previous proposal that had just gable ends, and that looked a little bit stark and a little bit massive. And so when these gable ends were clipped, there's more of a greater feel to to the street and a lowering of the overall height. You'll notice the roof lines because of the span of the one-story structure. There's a larger span in the center, and then as the building goes backwards and staggers towards the end of the lot into the corner, it gradually tapers downward. So staff believes that this particular proposal, also the colors and characteristics, they have a little bit of a blue, a little bit of, towards the garage door and the front door. You'll notice there's also more of a gray palette as opposed to more of the earthy tones, but staff felt that this would not be inconsistent with the rest of the neighborhood. With that said, staff believe this house would be appropriate, compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and we recommend approval with conditions, the two conditions being that the windows be framed either with wood or hardy plank trim and sills, and that perhaps the developer would consider upgrading the window material from vinyl to either fiberglass or aluminum or whatnot. So that said, concludes staff's presentation. I'm available to answer any questions you might have.
Do we have a material board?
I do, in the case packet. Yes.
Okay. And also, is there, there's the entry has a high ceiling in this area, and then there's this kind of mass. Is there a particular reason why that's there, or has that been discussed? The reasoning for that?
I'm going to let the designer, the developer, answer that question. Okay. So, if you don't mind. But yes, there is the actual entry foyer is 2-story. So.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, just if we get the picture.
I will bring it right to you.
And Mr. Yes.
I have questions.
Yes.
Is the house 2000 or 1889?
1889.
Okay.
Yes, 1889.
Okay.
And would you like the neighborhood photos as well?
Yes. So while staff is getting that, our first speaker is Kendall Hales. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Kendall Hales. I'm the applicant for this project. This is our last of the 3 lots that we are going to be building on, and appreciate the input from staff on this project. They've been really helpful. I was trying to put a 2-story in. I actually had a design trying to do something with a very low second-story roof, and then because I wanted to try to take advantage of the backyard, but in talking with staff and going back and forth, and knowing how the neighbors feel about it, we tabled that and came up with a single-story design. We get less yard, but I think for the most part, I think most people will be happy. In part of the design, I also, right behind the garage, you can tell we jogged the house over an additional foot because I wanted to be able to give a little more space to our neighbor to the left of us. So we did that. I could have gone straight back and made the house a little bigger, a little more roomier, but I felt that the tapering back right behind the garage was of benefit to the neighbors and to the overall project. So we're keeping with the same theme of the craftsman style. We feel that has kind of a timeless feel to it and works well in that neighborhood. With respect to Mr. Simone, your comment on the entryway, that I don't think we've actually determined how we're going to structurally do that on the inside. I haven't really sat down with the engineer to decide if we're going to keep it vaulted or just have a flat ceiling. Anyway, the reason maybe it looks spacious there is just because that's the peak that covers the whole house. That's the highest point. Anyway, we're below 1,900 square feet, which I think is compatible with the neighborhood. The lot's almost 7,000 square feet. We did look at the existing structures in the back and initially trying to incorporate those somehow, but they're so badly deteriorated with dry rot and mold. They haven't had anything done to them structural-wise for many, many, many years. So there's not really anything of value there to try to salvage at this point. So we will consider aluminum windows. I'll look into that. And I also, always around my windows, I use trim around the windows, and I use water table sills to dress those up and give them a little more depth. So that definitely will happen. That's it.
Do we have any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Hall. Are you relocating the Parkway tree?
Excuse me?
Are you relocating the Parkway tree?
Yes. Yes, that will have to be relocated.
And I'll ask the question again now. So we have kind of this drop ceiling, and then we have this void space up here, which of course is adding this area to the facade. What was the primary reasoning for having this drop ceiling kind of raised roof?
I'm trying to understand. You're looking at the section there. Overall, that space I don't think is that. I wasn't really, when we designed it, I wasn't thinking about having a two-story feel going in the entryway. I haven't even thought about that at that point. I was more concerned about some symmetry in the house and how it looked from the street. And dealing with that space on the interior is something that I'll deal with when I get to the construction documents and talk to the
Not
engineer.
so much the interior, but of course when you have a higher roof level, and then you have a void space, an attic, and then a drop ceiling, the higher the roof gets and
Right.
the bigger of a height the attic space gets, the more bulk and mass you end up in the building.
Right.
So I was wondering if there was any specific reason why you had that.
Understand.
kind of in
Okay,
there.
so what we tried, as you look at the size of the house, the width of the house, behind the two front protrusions in the front, we just covered the roof, went from one side of the house to the other, and we used a low 4 and 12 pitch roof, and that's just where the peak ended up. So that height was just a matter of how we covered the whole structure from left all the way to right, and keeping a low pitch, that's just where the height ended up. So I don't think there was any premeditation in creating a voluminous space at all. That's just how the roof lines worked out with the floor plans that we were dealing with.
How high is that, by the way?
It ends up being about 18 to 20 feet, 18 to 19 feet, I
How
think.
high is this attic area right in here?
Right in the very front,
Yeah.
that would be maybe 12 feet. You're talking about the fascia board, the
No, I
straight
mean,
little
the
fascia
attic,
board?
the attic area that you've created right in here. What is this dimension?
That's, right there? That's probably 4 or 5 feet max.
More than that.
Looks like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
As you can see on the front elevation, that front roof is clipped.
I was going back to Mr. Simonia's question, so really the second story, the void space is basically this area.
But as you see, the roof line is clipped back, so it actually goes up at an angle, comes down low in the front.
This is the updated?
And how are you treating, Mr. Hall, how are you treating this edge here? Is that you have a sill, or is that that protrudes out?
That's the stone. Is that?
The stone doesn't
That's the
wrap around
stone.
in that elevation. Just kind of stops at that sill line.
I can't see it from here.
Well, you could come up if you would like. Yeah.
Look at it. It's been a while since I've used these things. You don't look into that. Oh, this right here?
Right.
Okay, typically what I would do on this, since I've got siding, I've got stucco underneath it, we would run a water table all the way across here, and it would come in underneath these windows. So there would be a water table break between the stucco and the siding.
since we got some updated drawings recently, we're going over some of the information which wasn't originally in the
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
So on your elevations, on every side you have a different height elevation, and at the rear you're showing 20 foot 2 inches, in the back or the left elevation, call it 19.3. And I'm not sure I understand, it's based on the grades? Is that what it is? And then what's the front elevation, which is 20 feet? So it's actually less, so is it, what is the highest elevation you have? I mean, every elevation you have is a different height, and so we just want to know.
Well, it's how the lot is kind of gently upsloped in the front, obviously, is where you need to...
We have a survey on this?
Yeah. I don't know if I've submitted a survey. When I say sloping gently, I'm talking maybe 2 feet from the front to the back of the property.
Higher or lower?
It goes up.
It goes up?
Yeah.
So it's 2 foot higher in the back?
Well, the back of the house is going to be probably a foot or two into the ground. So it actually will be, the back elevation will be less, from the front elevation will be the highest.
I believe what Mr. Malikian is referring to is on the actual elevation plans. It shows on the left elevation at the rear an overall height of 19.3, which would be at the rear, based on it. But when we measure height, it would be from the lowest point on the ground to the top of the highest point of the roof, which from the front would be 20 feet 2 inches. So there is a slope, and there's an upslope from the street to the rear.
While Mr. Malikian is thinking about those
No,
figures...
I'm fine. We can go ahead and...
As an overall kind of a question where we're looking at the three projects together, when we analyzed the first project, which was the corner one, it had very intricate craftsman details to it. There was quite a bit of detail to it. And then I noticed the second building, it was
A little bit less.
And then when we have this third proposal, it's even more bare bones, and it's almost like been value engineered, and it just doesn't possess that kind of ornate, wonderful craftsman details that you had on the first one. So was wondering why, as we move closer to the more historic home, where we're losing some of that craftsman charm.
I can explain that. Some of that is because it's a single-story house. When you have 2 stories, it gives you more space to do some of that detailing. When you have gabled ends, you can do some nice detailing in those. When you have a single-story house like this, a third of the front is a garage door, then the other third you have, the rest of the house, and we clip the gable ends as well to keep the massing down low. So when you're trying to keep the mass down, it doesn't allow you enough square footage or space to add some of that detailing. But if you notice that we do have a lot of materials going on in the front. We're using a lot of natural stone as a nice wainscot around the front. And above the windows and right below the fascia, we're using a nice shingle look, cedar shingle look. And then as you notice, it's better seen in the perspective over the entryway. We have a very interesting detail with the rafters, the open rafters over the front door. So I think with the space that we had, I think we have a lot going on There's a point where you could put too much in it, and I didn't feel that it was necessary around the sides because there's not much to see on there. And again, it's a single-story roof, so you see roof, and then it just comes down to the side of the house. So I feel like we actually did a nice job in putting some nice features and details on the front with the corbels sticking out. I think it's better to see in the perspective than on the elevation. The elevation's a little deceptive it's a little flat looking.
Mr.
Yes,
Bush.
please go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
You're going with that window?
Yeah, I actually gave Billy the other copy. I think we put the wrong colored rendering up because the window's not changed. But it is, see the upper window, it's in thirds?
Yeah.
That is the one that we will be doing.
Okay. I like that.
The colored rendering doesn't reflect that, but it.
Mr. Hall, have you explored, I know you've done a wonderful job in the front. That's my feeling about it. But it loses it on the side. This character home of such style should continue the roof treatment on the side and the back. Now, have you explored doing gables in the back? Because it feels that the back piece is a separate piece than the front. There is no cohesiveness that's wrapping around the building. Have you explored maybe gable roof at least at the back to kind of resemble what's going on outside?
Well, in some of the discussion with staff, there's some consistency that we'd like to maintain. If we're going to do gables, then let's do all gables. And I think that was one of my first versions of it. But it seemed to be a little too had too much massing from the street, and so we went to the clipped ends, and then everything kind of transitioned into the hipped roofs, which keeps the massing down for the neighbors. When you go gables, you end up having higher peaks and more building. When you notice the lot, and there'll be a 6-foot fence down property line, there's really not much. There's the oak trees that hang low. There's not a lot of things that you're going to see, the neighbors would actually see of the house on the sides. And so, we like to put the money into the front where people are going to see it and the community will see it. The sides, I don't think, and it is the one side you can see it steps back on that one. It keeps stepping and stepping. So that depth on the side, I think, it will be a nice thing. It will look nice. It won't look like just a flat wall. And that's another reason why behind the garage we instepped a foot, just to give us a depth break and change the roof line a little bit. So,
Just on what Mr. Martin said, maybe bringing this treatment into maybe just this one roof line here. So when you're in the back, you can kind of see that instead of...
Again, we could do that, but we're talking, the Design Review Board is to make sure that the community has a house that looks really good from the street. What looks like from the back, and especially what's behind that house, is a 20-foot block wall, because there's the apartment building behind it, and there's no windows or anybody that looks out into that backyard. So I don't know if it's really necessary at that point. I mean, it could be done, but I don't see a necessity for it.
Well, we have some speaker cards from the community, so why don't we move along?
Go ahead.
And,
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Bless you. We'll have an opportunity for a rebuttal as well, and we'll kind of keep the hearing moving along and explore some of these questions maybe a little later while we're convening on our own and talking about it, the discussion portion. Okay? Thank you. Next speaker is Ruth Enslow.
She requested that her speaker card be taken back.
Okay.
Actually, so apologies. Here, I'll take
Request
that.
granted. Barbara Hannigan.
I'm Barbara Hannigan, live at 2819 Manhattan, which is directly adjacent. You can see the side of my house right here. And we've met with Mr. Hales and really appreciate the design. We've really appreciated that it's a one-story. We really have no major issues with it. But now, as I was sitting there looking at this, and he was explaining this peak in the front. I don't know which is the most correct. Is it the rendering seems much lower to me than the actual computer generated. I don't know which is really the correct height. But just for future reference, he was saying he wasn't sure if he was going to make a flat roof or like a cathedral ceiling when you walked in. But just for future reference, to say they do a flat roof, is that a livable space that, like, say, the future owner could finish and make a room up there with windows and things that could possibly, or is it not compatible for that? Would there be enough room to do that?
When we thought about that, we looked, and it doesn't seem there's really much place to put a stairway up to that area. So our sense at staff, unless they changed room configurations or reduced the number of bedrooms, would be that was unlikely. They could put a hatch there that you could access by a ladder or one of those pull-down stairs and use it to store things. I didn't see that as an issue.
Okay.
But
May I
that could change.
ask Mr. Jaquith, but in the zoning code, it says attic areas, I believe, over 6 feet become floor area?
If they're accessible by a full-time stairway leading up to the attic, but an attic that's solely accessed by hatch or something wouldn't count as habitable. Oh.
Okay, I just wanted to check that they couldn't put a window on that side that overlooks my house and the yard and all that. That's what I was trying to avoid.
They
Otherwise,
couldn't put a window in.
okay, great. Otherwise, we're really pretty satisfied with the design.
Well, they can.
They can,
Put a
but
dormer.
what, they need to adhere to what's been approved.
Right.
Got it. Okay. That's it. That's my only comment.
Doesn't stop them from doing it without repercussions. Is what-
Right. That's right.
Thank you.
Great.
Michael Morgan. Good evening.
Hi, Commissioner, Chairman, Commissioners. My name's Michael Morgan, and I'm here not so much to comment on the structure being built, but the structure being taken away. I will let you all argue the design points of this structure. I am on the Historic Preservation Commission, but I am definitely speaking as an individual. I take historic preservation very seriously. Though a prior Historic Preservation Commission deemed the stone cabin structure not to be historically significant, I do not concur. As one of the first buildings in the Crescenta Valley, how could it not be? This building can be traced to at least 1905, 8 years before the founding of Montrose, 1 year before the incorporation of Glendale itself. Our president was then Theodore Roosevelt. The Great War was not even thought of. When this building was constructed, the Crescenta Valley was almost devoid of all structures. The building is probably older, but county record books that would show the construction date are sadly lost. Could this building have been built by Colonel Pickens? We will probably never know. I have given each of you a packet of photos of that structure so that you can see one last time what will be lost to progress. The building is more than poetically listed in the report as rubble stone, but the beginning of man's venture into the Crescenta Valley. When this was constructed, you could see across the valley unblocked by any structures. That day is long ago. Every action has a consequence, and your vote to approve the house will add one more housing stock to a now crowded valley, but far greater than that will remove a piece of Crescenta Valley history. My concern is to see that rushing to fulfill the present, we do not eliminate the past. The stone cottage, after 108 years, deserves at least that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Morgan, as a question, because of the irregular shape of the site, what would you propose to be done with that historic, well, it's not historic.
What I would like to have done to it,
Yes.
if it
What do you-
couldn't remain on site to be moved somewhere else, I've always envisioned it as taking third graders to see what the valley originally was like. I mean, it's a touch to the past, truthfully. It's not like anything out there. There's nothing like it in Glendale itself. I mean, it's one of the few places that's...
Has your organization looked into the logistics or a place to find a home for it?
Well, we've talked about moving up to Duke-Magian Park, but it requires funds, and so, no, not at this moment.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I want to ask Mr. Morgan a question. Thank you for refreshing, these are refreshing pictures.
Nice to have the pictures.
Yeah.
I just,
I happened to review this when I was in the Historic Commission in 2006, and if I'm not mistaken, the commission truly went through a lot of review and a lot of research. Also, I believe we also talked to the building department. This building is not habitable, and if my recollection serves me right, if I remember correctly, was the structure was not, structural integrity was gone, based on our analysis at that time. And we went through a lengthy discussion on this structure, and the commission found that the structure was not, significant due to the fact because of neglect, and that is not habitable. Structural integrity was lost, and we determined that it was not historically significant. I wish you were at that time, came and voiced your opinion.
I did.
But
I did then, and I've done ever since. But it's like I said, it's 108 years old, and obviously in 108 years you could lose historic.
Even thinking of relocating it, it'll fall apart by the time you relocate the structure. That's my personal opinion, though.
Okay.
Well, thank you for refreshing my memory.
Thank you. I do not have other speaker cards on this item. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak on this case? Mr. Hales, would you like to come up for rebuttal, any kind of closing thoughts on this?
Okay, sure.
And if you don't need to, you
Well,
could
I'll just
say you've said everything you need to say. and we move on.
I'm a big fan of La Crescenta history. In fact, on my computer, I have all the pictures that the La Crescenta Historical Society has, because I love that. I love to look and see what's there. In fact, I tried to, when I first got this property, I wanted to see where that property was in the original pictures and see if I could see that oak tree in the front and pinpoint exactly where it was. But I tried to figure out something to do with that structure, but it's just so far gone that it doesn't. If you fix it up 100% or 90%, then there's no really historical value to it if you've totally redone it. But there's just not enough there, and there was some buildings that were attached to it in the interim that degraded the intrinsic value of that structure. So it's unfortunate, but there's not much I can do with it at this point.
The river rock that you're proposing on the front facade is.
I'd be happy to take the river rock off of that structure and put on the front. So maybe there's something there that we could do. I mean, I'd rather use it than haul it away. So
Absolutely.
that's something that we could definitely.
Hard to come by that material.
That we could do, yeah. So absolutely, and I think that was it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Just
Yes.
one last brief staff comment. The project was reviewed by Anne Marie Sheets, the urban forester, simply because they do have an existing oak tree on site, and there are oak trees within 20 feet. She reviewed the plans. There was an oak tree report submitted as well. She has submitted mitigation measures for the maintenance and preservation of that oak tree. So with that, just wanted to
Thank you.
make note of that to the design review board.
In other words, the drip lines and everything has been considered.
It has been considered, yes.
Thank you. Very good. So that concludes the public portion. Mr. Malakian, you want to start us off on this?
Sure. And I appreciate you catching on to this, that what the comment that you made about the quality and the level of details, that it's kind of decreasing and degrading as it got to this point. And I appreciate developer stating his concern and his thoughts. I think it is our responsibility to look at the entire project as a whole, not as just a view from the street. So, having said that, and understanding, the cost issues and other things that are involved, I think there less thought has gone into the detailing of this project and making this. It is a simple project. It is a simple one-story building, but yet it's managed itself to be a little bit more intricate in the front, but then as it turns and it goes into the back, it starts losing its quality. Such as Ms. Mardian noticed that the base wainscoting of the river rock did not wrap around the corner. I mean, it is great looking head-on, but as you come up the street, and then you can't really tell on the perspective, but I do want to see that carrying over, as well as how the treatment of the roof, that it's coming down with the edges, that the exposed rafters that are there, and that's completely gone as it gets cut off with the sheer cut off of the roof line between the garage and the back area. So there's a lot of these conditions that it's been brought forth with the condition of the site and the way that the wedge of the building, the wedge of the property is, and how they try to fit this building into the space. One of the issues that I have, besides the mixture of different types of roofs that are there, the previous one that had the gable roof, personally, I think it worked towards the actual craftsman's style. For me, it was a lot more true to its style than, adding the hip roof to that. I understand that adding the hip roof brings the roof or the mass of that, it reduces that. But I think that can be solved by reducing the pitch of the roof. Rather than going with the typical 4 and 12, you can go with the shallow roof, and I'm not sure how that's going to work with the roofing materials, and I'm sure there are ways that it can be done. But as you go around the corner and as you get to the back of the building, because of the wedge-shaped building, and they're forced to have these hip roofs that are placed there to cover all these wedges that are created, and then you end up having this fascia board around the trim of the. So you get all these different style of roof styles, and I mean, there's not much to this project, but there's so many things happening that for me it's a concern. The other biggest concern that I have, which we were somewhat fortunate because of the massing that we have, the site planning of these 3 projects, we were fortunate to see all these projects in its progression. I kind of like the second option that we got, the second project that we got, and because of the oak tree that was in the backyard, we have a substantial amount of open space left of that site. And so, and I'm assuming that these parcels are going to be sold separately and they're going to be basically utilized. If it was just an open campus of different buildings, then they could have utilized that. Even though it's not a property, it could have be an open space that everybody can use. But on this one, because of the back oak trees, because of the side setbacks, and because of the front setback, it basically created the shape of the building. And, if we are happy with the 20-foot building and the roof that they're creating, I think it would be better to keep it at the same height and be able to shove something in there in that 20-foot space. This huge roof that we have, we're going to end up having a 7-foot, 7.5, 8-foot, create some sort of a small little room there and push that extra space from the back and push it up there and add a bedroom or something. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's an option. But for me, maximizing this footprint and possibly, not even going to second floor, reducing the entire building, I think it's just a mixture of all these roofs, all these details, and also maximizing the site plan. I think it's kind of pushing the limit for me, this one. The rest of the other 2, I think it was fine. We looked at different options in the 2-story, and then it turned into a 1-story, and this one is 1-story. Technically is a 1-story, but you have a mass of a 2-story. And that's where I'm trying to figure out where the whole thing kind of falls in. So I'll leave it off right now, and so let you guys talk about it and see what you guys think.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Maleki. Mr. Mardian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do agree with Mr. Malikan that it loses its character in the sides. But before I get into the design, I want to first, thank the applicant for choosing to do it one story. I think that's a good direction that he chose. The comments that I have, I concur with some of the comments that my colleague made, is it's a beautiful house from the front, and I have no problem from the front. But when it comes around and wraps around, it just loses it. I think some continuity should occur on the sides. I have a few. I think you have an opportunity to create the gables because your roof lines will not change. Maybe incorporate some of it. Not necessarily make every break a gable, but at least bring some of the elements in the back. Even you're leaving some space in the back. I'm assuming somebody will go out there and look at it. The person who is living there. And I do agree also that the footprint has been maximized. There's not much relief to the side new houses that he's proposing, especially where all these jogs occur. But maybe by eliminating a couple of these jogs, creating the gables, I'll be satisfied with it. The other comment that I have, it's minor, is I don't know if the garage door is appropriate for this kind of style home. And the chimney looks a little flimsy to me, but I'll let choose how to go on that one. But as far as the front, I have no issues with the front. I think it's simple, but it has details. I wish some of these details carried around the sides of the building. And I'd like to hear what Mr. Sarkisian has.
Thank you. Mr. Sarkisian. Again, I too don't have a problem with the front. I think it's beautiful. And Mr. Martin said if we could carry some of the details, especially to the back. I mean, I could imagine myself sitting in that backyard, even though it's small. I would want to feel that, feel the house from the front carried into the back, because it looks really, really plain in the back. That's it for me.
Not only so much the plainness, the simplicity is fine. It just feels to me that it's just two separate structures.
Yeah.
That's the key. The roof is creating that.
Yeah. And if there is a way, I'm sure he'll find a way. Mr. Hall is creative enough to come up with these designs and quality. I think you can incorporate that in the back somehow.
I think the back looks like the side. I mean, you couldn't be able to tell which one's which of you.
Sure, I have a question for staff. What is the maximum overhang of the roof into setback?
The maximum
Inches?
the roof itself,
30 inches.
30 inches. It
30
would not
inches,
be
right?
closer than 30 inches to the property line.
I don't think that the wedge of the roof is 30 inches, to be honest with you. I think it's over. It's almost 3.5 feet.
The required setback for an R1 home is 6 feet.
Right.
So right now, if it has a 36 inch, 3 foot, 3.5 foot
And
overhang.
I'm not questioning it. Only reason that I'm saying is based on this 1 foot, if you take this, assuming that based on, this is the 6 foot, and this is the edge. I'm going to try to see if I can see it in this plan. These are the corners. You take this, and you come out 30 inches, because this is 1 foot. So 1, 2, 3, or based on that, I'm guessing about 3.5 to 4 feet of overhang. Again, this brings it back to the roofing of the back area. I think it really will help the project if the front roof and the back are kind of consistent and work together and doesn't create these two separate buildings, front and back. I think that definitely that area needs to be looked at. I could be wrong, but I'm just going based on the dimensions that it's there.
If the board members could give us some guidance on that, because we definitely recognize the same issue that you're finding. But the insertion of gables on that very complicated, staggered rear facade started introducing some strange geometries. And what we found was the hipped roof was kind of the lesser of those evils in some ways, because we felt it was very respectful of the neighbors in terms of the massing that we're pushing toward the edges of the site. So if you want to condition a roof change back there, it would be very helpful for us to see if you have any more specific guidance than that.
Very good. Well, so it's now my turn to talk, and I'm going to try to integrate some of those items in there as well. Overall, this is a very unique opportunity for us, not only of its kind of adjacency to a somewhat important building that's been present in the neighborhood for many, many years, but just because there were 3 lots, and we've really seen 3 separate applications come forward. And that in itself is unique because we didn't have them all at the same time. We had them one at a time. And I personally was impressed by the first application, the corner dwelling unit. I thought it was done very well. Yeah, the amount of detail that you put into that building was commendable. And I could tell that your heart was in it, and you really tried to come up with a true craftsman. And to us, that was very comforting, and at the same time, we went along with that. And not only was it comforting, but you were putting a single-family home in a multifamily zone. So in all aspects of it, it was just a win-win scenario for everybody. A multifamily building wasn't going in the corner, a single family was, and it was a true craftsman, and it just very well worked out, and the drip lines and whatnot were totally thought of. And then on the second application, again, it was a difficult scenario because of the angle lots and whatnot, and the drip lines and the oak trees, but again, you were able to integrate the craftsman feel into it, and not as much as the first. However, it was a more difficult site to work with. You certainly had, it was backing up to the multifamily, and it was tapered and whatnot. But again, it went through, I think, the first time. I don't even think you had to come back with the second home. It just was approved. Now, in this scenario, when I saw the address, I was immediately, looking forward to a very, thought out craftsman. And so, as I went through the package, as I indicated earlier, that was not there, and it really could be a function of many things. Maybe it was the direction that you received, that it should be a one-story, and of course, the economics come into play. You do a one-story, you're trying to do a modest one-story, and you try to fit it into a site, so you have a lot going there to try to accommodate. And I think that's why Mr. Mardian is appreciative of that effort that you went with the one story, and this board as well. We truly appreciate that. Now, I think what everyone's putting their finger on, and I said the same thing earlier, the roof design of the project is the confusing part of all this. To add some more details on the sides and the rear, it's not a very difficult thing. It could be done, and it could be prescribed somewhat easily. However, the roof really needs to be worked out because it just seems like 2 different structures. And what also it's doing is, from the front view, it's really giving it a 2-story feel to it. And if we're going to have a 2-story massing in the front, then let's make it a 2-story, and let's put in those craftsman details, as Mr. Malakian was talking about. Not only will you get your 2-story, but you'll get a bigger backyard, and you'll have a nicer building. However, we probably don't want to convolute the matter any more than it is. So I'm going to kind of step back after saying that and saying, okay, now let's consider the 1-story. And as such, as we're discussing this 1-story, I think the roof design needs to be reworked, and I'm comfortable. Well, personally, I'm comfortable with staff working on that. However, I could be convinced otherwise if the board feels as though it needs to come back.
Well, I think just help the whole situation. I think keeping this, personally, I think gable, having a gable truss or trellis or whatever you want to call it in the front. Coming in, I think I like that detail, and I like that structure, and I think that should be carried through. And it shouldn't be the only element. So I think the previous design worked well with what was being introduced. Problem is that when we're when we're introducing the hip roof, it allows the structure to be taller.
Yes.
Therefore, the hip roof kind of works in that, towards that benefit of having a tall roof. My point is, what if that 4 and 12 becomes 2 and 12? You know, why does it have to be a 4 and 12? Why can't it be a shallower roof slope?
The 312 is probably the...
No, you can. 2 and 12 you can. It's just a matter of applying additional roof materials underneath to be able to get you the torch down roof or whatever it is, and then apply that material over that. So there are ways that it can be done. It's a shallower roof, a larger overhangs, exposed rafters. That brings it, and then post and beam details and so forth. So that allows you to be able to introduce work with a lot of different conditions there. That it's but again, having a large space in the middle, I think, and then not carrying that through the back area and then cutting it off right by the garage and then introducing a whole new. If I sit here and design this thing, I mean, I don't think that we should. I think we should note the issues, and I think that we should just leave it off where the problems are. I think.
Well, and I agree with the comments, by the way, your direction on it. So just to finish off my thoughts on it, overall, I think we should do better than vinyl windows. If we're going with siding, if we're going to go with a hardy siding, then we should use hardy trim instead of those 2x4s. The 2x4s are very rough. Hardy trim, which will certainly soften it up and it'll work better. If we're using shingles, on the top portion, it should be a hardy shingle, which is a quality material. And the river rock that you're introducing, it would be, I think, a shame if we didn't integrate it from the existing in the back. This is something that I think is just such a great story to integrate, and community could work with you on this. They could take pictures while it's doing it, or they could come out and help you while it's being taken apart, and so in a way you're reusing this wonderful river rock that's there. So I would imagine that since all the studying had been done where it's difficult to relocate that building, it should be integrated into it. And then you'll have the opportunity to wrap around, because you'll have plenty of stone to work with, I would imagine, to wrap it around. And the chimney could even start turning into something stone, and it could have more of a base to it. So those were my thoughts. I think overall, I would kind of celebrate that reuse of that material. It's past this structural kind of prime, and there's just it's a hazard, so it needs to come down. But at least let's use that material into the building. So it seems as though we've given enough direction now. So now the last thing we need to kind of talk about is if we wanted to come back, or if we're comfortable, staff working out these details.
I'm comfortable for staff working out these details. I actually like this recent elevation, although I respect my colleagues' comments whether this should have been gable, but the other two are gables. So this is a nice introduction of breaking that hip. So I really don't have a problem. Maybe I would kind of go with the slope, maybe drop this 3 to 12. And reduce
or even more, yeah.
I mean, 3 to 12. If it's going to cost them more to drop the slope more, I'd rather that money spent on the sides and the back than I'll be happy with the 3 to 12 and introduce similar details in the back.
So it's basically a redesign of the roof is what we're talking about.
The rear and the side,
with exposed rafter tails,
right,
and a holistic kind of a roof language that carries around the building.
And I do agree with Mr. Sarkisian that the rendering The window in the center in the front should match the rendering.
And we're talking about, okay, so why don't we use this opportunity then for staff to go over the conditions of what we have so far?
Okay, would you like me, or you?
I've got it if you want. I think most importantly what we're hearing is that the board is okay with the front facade design, more or less. We're going to reduce the pitch of the roof to a minimum, or to 312 at the maximum. We're going to explore whether we can reduce to even further with the 212 and see if there are cost implications of that that might be balanced out with better material use at the sides. We're going to carry some of the details that we see at the front facade to the rear. That would include wainscoting, some additional trim materials, not necessarily river rock running all around the building, I would guess.
I would, in his elevation, he's calling it a right elevation. I would at least carry that over to
Sure.
the edge of the
Yeah, around that room
plaster.
there.
Yeah.
Because it'll be visible from the street.
Right.
The way the corner building is situated, if you look at the
I'm not
first
sure
page
on
of
the-
the
We
side
could also
plan.
wrap around the garage side. There's a break.
Oh, yeah, the garage, I mean, there's no information. At least, let that kind of wrap back at least a couple of feet and then let it lie in.
Well, we actually have a break there where he notches in the rear part of the house. So
But
maybe-
that's forward, it's not back, so
the garage is forward from the rear.
on the
wall,
left elevation.
on the left-hand elevation,
But where would you bring that stone up to?
to the door.
To the door?
Yeah. Or we could just bring the wainscot line, a trim piece there, and also bring the hardy plank trim.
No, I mean, he's introducing stone in the front, so I would wrap that stone.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's what and break it at the door.
Yeah,
garage
that's
side.
fine.
Okay, so we will.
Oh, and also, I'm sorry,
And also introduce some. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
and the siding as well.
Siding at the garage side.
Yeah. Because it just dies in at the edge, so you wrap the same thing.
And I think I also heard that the board would like to see more trim elements even at the further rear portions of the facades, which could
And the
be
trim to be hardy trim.
hardy trim in certain
hardy
areas, a
trim.
mix of trim and stucco at those areas, and perhaps keeping the datum line established by the wainscoting. It made sense back there. The chimney should be beefed up in terms of its dimensions, and some of the reused stone should be used at the base of the chimney. There was a comment made about the garage door not being appropriate. I wasn't sure if there was consensus on that.
It could lean more towards a craftsman style.
Right, yeah.
So more craftsman-style door.
I think all these are somewhat conditions that we're going over because
Sure,
we're
so
leaning
far,
towards
yeah.
staff handling it.
Yeah, well, what I'm thinking for a more craftsman-style door, it could be broken into so it looks like two doors, have a vertical running down the center,
Different ways to do it.
something along those lines.
Oh, I'm sorry, going back to the wrapping of the stone, if you look at the rear elevation, he's wrapping the siding around the side of the building,
Right, and you'd
so
like
I would wrap the stone as well,
to bring the stone around.
similar as we...
Okay, for the full front section of the building, we'll wrap
Right.
stone and siding, and then we'll work more with trim elements for the rest of the
Right.
rear facades. We'll use hardy trim and hardy shingle materials. We will have not use vinyl windows, use one of the other approvable
Aluminum is
substitutes.
fine. I
Aluminum.
think the applicant asked for that. Although I don't know if they make some of those aluminum windows in that craftsman style that he's going after, but looks like they're all plain windows, so no, they should work.
Yeah, he wasn't proposing any grids on these
Yeah.
windows, except at the side lights at the door.
Yeah, that should work.
And then we're going to make sure the drawings show that the three-part window shown in the rendering is incorporated at the front elevation. And whatever happens at the rear roofs, we're going to try to bring more of a gabled roof system at the rear. We're going to try to have exposed rafter tails and overhangs that are similar to what we see at the front to kind of unify the roof design.
Okay. And we were going to reuse the existing historic stone in the back.
Yeah, that was actually, I believe that was part of the proposal. That's why we didn't make it a staff recommendation, but we'll put it in just so it's clear.
Is there anything that hasn't been summarized by Mr. Platt so far.
That's right.
So could I, does anybody want to entertain a motion? To approve?
Yeah.
The project as.
Okay. I'll second the motion. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Good. And as such, we don't have any other agenda items, cases on our agenda. However, there's the Hillside Review Training discussion, which is going to take place now. And as such, we should probably take a moment and ask Ms. Palmer to join us again. And once we're ready, we can reconvene.
Should we take a break?
Yeah, we should. She's got to call it in for us to do it.
Take a 5 minute.
Tim, can you call in a quick
I think they can.
5-minute break, or?
Just say.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break.
start singing?
Back.
Yes, now we are.
Oh, we're resuming. Training.
What that is.
Dialogue.
Thank you. It is on.
Mine was not on. I'm guilty.
Thank you. Microphone's on. So yes.
Thanks
Mr.
for
Floyd.
stepping on my introduction, Delia. This came out of the permit streamlining effort that was held over the last year. It was instituted by the city manager and resulted in a focus group representing a lot of different stakeholder interests in the city, and ended up with an ordinance adopted by the city council. This is one of many parts of that ordinance. There are a number of ways in which that ordinance affected design review, including a new administrative design review category. We won't be going into that tonight, but just to let you know that gives staff the ability to approve, without a public hearing, additions and facade changes to single-family houses. Not new single-family houses, but on a staff level, if staff is comfortable with it and finds it to be compatible, it can be approved on a staff level. What is before you tonight specifically is another aspect of the ordinance which transferred the review of hillside development from a conditional use permit to being part of the design review process. For the last 20 years or so, new construction of single-family homes in the ROS and R1R zones on properties that had a greater than 50% slope, or a street frontage of less than 80 feet, or where there was more than 1,500 cubic yards of grading, had to first obtain a conditional use permit from either the zoning administrator or later on from a planning hearing officer. So what this involved was an application that would come in and be routed to a bunch of different city departments. The most important ones for these were probably the utilities, the indigenous tree protection folks, as well as public works engineering. And the planning hearing officer would make a decision regarding generally placement of the house on the lot, as well as some design characteristics of the house if they felt that it had to be made. After that permit was approved, if it wasn't appealed, it would go to the design review board for further design work. There are a couple of problems with this process, in that it was very lengthy, for one. Secondly, it involved multiple bodies doing review of the same thing, really. It was confusing to the public because they didn't understand what power the DRB had after the conditional use permit had been approved. I think at times the design review board shared that exact same confusion and frustration. So in order to just make this more of a holistic review, the ordinance that the council adopted said that this special hillside review should really be an integral part of this board's review of plans and projects. So those previously, as I said, there were 3 circumstances under which a conditional use permit would be required. When there was more than 50% slope on a property, when there was more than 1,500 cubic yards of grading, or when the street frontage was less than 80 feet wide. The very last one we kind of dropped as a marker for special review, because it just ended up not really making a difference in the real world, having the 80-foot, whether it was 70, 60, 80, 90 feet of lot width. The issues were all the same. So there are some aspects. So what we're going to go over tonight is the review of new single-family homes in the R1R and ROS zones when there's more than 1,500 cubic yards of grading or with a grade slope. So with that, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. Number one, we're going to show you some pictures of houses in Glendale that will help illustrate some of the ways in which some of the issues that staff has chosen to focus on as our hillside review has developed, and which I think the board probably will also want to review. If we show a picture of a house and we talk about a certain aspect of it, we're not saying that that house was built illegally. It almost certainly was done with the review of some design review board in the last 20 years. We're really just focusing on one or two aspects that could be improved in the future, in our future reviews for other properties. So there are architects in the audience tonight who may have, or watching on TV, that may see some of their projects up here where one or two aspects might get discussed. I'm pretty sure that we have plans being shown tonight where the architect is actually a current design review board member. So I just really want to emphasize what we're talking about here is we're just giving these illustrative examples to try to improve things in the future for minor aspects.
Mr. Foy, Mr. Chair, I have a question for Mr. Foy. I'm sorry to cut you off, and
Sure.
Before you proceed to the next one. One of the process, and I personally have not gone through the CUP process for a hillside, but I'm assuming if you had to go through the CUP process, you had to submit plans, and part of the hearing process, the plans would have been routed through the Public Works, would have been routed through the engineering and other review processes. Now that once we eliminate this process, what happens to that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to continue to do that. And those reviews will become part of the packet and the analysis that you will see in staff reports for the Design Review Board. And also the code was amended to give the board power to impose conditions on those aspects. These are the comments that the Public Works Engineering suggested, the conditions they suggested. Since we don't have a CUP anymore, we're going to make them conditions of approval of the Design Review Board approval.
So if we see conditions there that code says that, let's just hypothetically says, it has to be a 5-foot retaining wall, and we see that it just doesn't look right or it doesn't feel right, and we think that we can increase that to 6 foot tall, or we lower that to 2 foot, or whatever, we have that power.
Okay, well, you're not allowed to impose a condition which exceeds a code maximum on retaining wall height.
Okay.
You cannot. That would require a variance, and this board can never impose a condition which requires an applicant to get a variance.
Okay.
You could say this wall is too high, and we think if you did some regrading, if you regraded it differently, you wouldn't
Right.
need that, or something like that.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So another thing I'd like to mention is that tonight we're not debating standards that apply. We're not going to be debating setbacks. We're not going to be debating the height of houses or how that height is measured, or we're not debating FAR or how the FAR is measured. What we're really going over, we will have some explanation of code sections. They are kind of especially tricky, but we're not coming forward with any zoning code amendments to change the development standards in these zones.
That's not the intent of this evening's discussion.
Right. City Council has not asked us to work on that. City Council initiates zone changes. Okay, so
Let me ask a question, Mr. Chair. So the process is substantially shortened in this case?
yeah, yes, there'll be, instead of having to get two permits with two separate processes, it'll be integrated into one permit process. And there are DRB approvals or denials can still be appealed.
And Mr. Foy, the DRB process certainly allows for a preliminary submittal, and there is a final submittal although we rarely see a preliminary submittal, but in some cases, it certainly would help the applicant in saving them time and effort and money if they were to do a preliminary submittal, especially now that we're combining everything, CUP and Design Review Board, where instead of them going through all the work to generate drawings and perspectives and color elevations, and then the house is just placed at the wrong part of a site because it just doesn't blend into the hillside. It just doesn't work. What has staff thought about perhaps working on making it a little more available for people to go down the preliminary submittal route?
Yeah, I mean, as you're right, I think since we instituted preliminary design reviews in the code, I can only remember one project that took advantage of it. But you're quite correct, and actually the CUP kind of functioned that way. I mean, the level of detail was not as stringent, the plans weren't as fully developed as what the DRB saw. So yeah, as we go through this, hopefully will become, it may become apparent to people that that's the route for them to go.
Sure. Especially if we could revisit the fees or something, perhaps, where it might make more sense, because it'd be quicker for staff to review and quicker for the audience and the public to get feedback if they're in the right direction.
Right. Well, and right now we're just starting the budget review for the next fiscal year starting July 1st, so it's an excellent time to do that.
Oh, okay. All right. Ms. Stotler.
May I also just mention, we have a number of staff here, including Jan Baer, our senior building plan check examiner. Did I get it right?
No.
Okay. And in addition to the ubiquitous Mr. Platt, we have Alan Loomis, who's the principal urban designer, and our relatively newly hired urban designer, Christina Gardy.
Yes.
Chair Simonian and members of the DRB. As Tim said, we're going to cover about 6 main issues that we've seen as planning hearing officers. And again, planning hearing officers were the group of folks that would hear the conditional use permits and make recommendations and put conditions on conditional use permits. Now that authority is being changed to you. And so that's why we wanted to point out some of the issues that our planning hearing officers have seen, so that hopefully you'll be able to see where we were coming from when we had a conditional use permit requirement. For grading and retaining walls, one of the issues that we have in our zoning code is maximum height, but a lot of that is predicated on requirements of the building code. So we'll go over that. We are also concerned that a lot of times when we would see proposals for grading oftentimes encompass properties that are not necessarily the one where they're having the grading. So we're concerned about off-site grading. We also have issues of building pads. We have a lot of existing building pads out in the hills. A lot of times people will not use a building pad, or they'll be expanding the building pad that's already there. That may require different ways to address those issues. And then kind of the overarching theory that we've had is to minimize landform alteration where possible. There's been a lot of discussion of balancing grading on site versus exporting. Given that certain properties, sometimes it actually makes more sense to export than balance on site in terms of having an impact upon neighbors. And we'll go over some examples of that. A lot of question comes up about how much is a cubic yard, so we wanted to provide sort of a visual example of how much a cubic yard of earth movement could look like. And again, the way we calculate earth movement, it's cut plus fill, is the way we look at grading. And I'd like to turn it over to Jan Baer to discuss some of the basics of the building code for retaining walls.
One of the main things that has come up on a lot of projects is what kind of setback do I need from the toe of the slope or from a downhill slope. When the plan finally comes to building and safety, we're now looking at it for the building code purposes. The basics are exactly what's shown here. There's 2 conditions. You either have a house on the top end of a slope or you have a house on the bottom end of a slope. And the figure on the left is for one on the bottom of a slope. It's not necessarily the backyard, but it's on the bottom end of a slope. And the building code requires that the building maintain a certain gap or buffer zone between the bottom of the slope and the house itself. And that's so if you have some sloughing of the hillside behind it, the house has some protection. There's a little catch basin back there to make sure that the building isn't damaged. The other option, and by calculating how big that is, it depends on how tall the slope is. If you notice on the right-hand side, there's a little or big capital H. And so that setback or that gap is that height of that slope divided by 2, but it has a maximum dimension of 15 feet. So you can have a mountain behind you and you'll still won't need more than a 15-foot level area behind the building. The other option is the one for the ones on the top of the slope. Again, the setback is different. It's not to the toe of the slope or anything. It's to the hillside face. And so again, looking at the right-hand side, you see the capital H, and that's the height of the slope. And then to measure the setback, you notice it's H over 3, or the height divided by 3, and that's from the bottom of the footing to the face of the slope. What you'll also see is that there's no maximum dimension. If you're on the top of a mountain and you have a slope that goes way down, you need a very deep footing. At the same point, you can build the house right to the edge of that top of slope, but you'll need a very deep footing. There are conditions where, based on the geology, you can reduce that depth based on a soils engineer's recommendation. But that's the basics we look at for every building. We try to look at where the slopes are and do they conform with these 2 main topics or requirements.
Just to clarify, Mr. Mayor, the H over 3 is for the purposes of the footing location.
Right. It has nothing to do with the height or the top of the slope.
Right. Yeah.
It has to do with the edge of the building.
Okay.
And the depth that footing has to be to get protection to the face of the slope. This is one that has a special requirement for upslopes. Santa Monica, near the beach, and you see the great cliffs. Well, this would require, if you're on the bottom of one of these cliffs, it'll make you build a little further away. We assume that things are going to fail to some point, and we now calculate using a 1-to-1 slope from the top of the slope down, and then you measure your setback from that. So you end up with bigger gaps between steeper slopes. And the next one is also an example of that, where if you're on the top of a hill, we'll use the same requirements to require deeper footings just for protection. And I know in the rains there was a lot of pictures of some of the failures up in San Clemente and up north where the slope came away right at the hillside and you saw very deep piles. And that was a good example of that they prepared themselves, they built their footings deep enough, and the building basically still stayed there after the slope failed to the edge of the building.
Mr. Bear, are there special maps that identify these hills where it goes beyond the 15-foot setback from the toe, and then you have to use this 1-to-1 trajectory?
We do not. A survey of any lot will show what the slopes are. If you go out and you do a survey and you are next to a granite slope that's at a 1/2-to-1 slope, it's very vertical, then these would apply. But at the same time, they may have a lot of stability in that your soils engineer, your geotechnical professional could identify where they may come up with an alternate solution. But we first go to the basics of the code.
Got it. So it's basically prescribed by the soil engineer and the geologist.
when a soils engineer and geologist come in, they can make recommendations based on site testing, geologic maps, that maybe there's some stability where some of these can be adjusted. But without that specific review of the site, we're going to go back to the code minimums.
Thank you.
Which concludes my portion.
Okay.
I will repeat that. This is a portion of our zoning code that talks about upslope retaining walls. If you have a house in an upslope condition, an upslope, we measure that from where the street is. So in this case, the street would be at the bottom of the page, and then the house would be upslope from the street. If you have a structure that is blocking the retaining wall to the rear from the street, you could have a maximum height of 15 feet. We also have interior setback requirements for retaining walls. If you're within 5 feet of the property lines, then the maximum retaining wall height would be 3 feet. Beyond that, it would be 5 feet. Except, of course, if you have a structure blocking. And this is just a diagram that shows what you would have in an upstreet or upslope situation. If you were putting a wall in front of a structure, you would have a maximum height of 5 feet. You may go up to an additional 2 feet if the wall is parallel to the street, and that would include any additional freeboard. Maximum height would be 7 feet. And if you had 2 walls, you would still have a maximum 5 foot for the retaining walls, but there would be a 5 foot separation between the walls and a maximum 2-to-1 slope between those walls. And then, again, this is a situation where you would have the upslope to the rear of a house. You can also have multiple retaining walls, again, maximum 5 feet retaining to the rear of a house when blocked by the structure. And again, if you're within 5 feet of the property line, maximum height would be 3 feet. Now, this is right from our zoning code. This talks about downslope conditions, and again, downslope would be measured from the street. You would have a 5 foot maximum visible to the rear of the structure. If you're within the 5 feet of the property line, it would be maximum 3 feet. And this is just a depiction of what that would look like from the street. If you're within the front setback, maximum of 5 feet. And like a situation Jan was pointing out earlier where you might have step pads, again, it just depends between the homes what your setback would be. That would determine the maximum height of your retaining wall. So here's just a visual of what a retaining wall behind a structure could look like. And again, maximum 15 feet, and then you may actually have additional freeboard atop retaining wall if necessary.
I have a question. So on all of these conditions that we talked about are just generic, flat, sitting, assuming that we have a flat pad, which none of them meets the hillside guidelines. Now, once we come into play and once we're dealing with all these retaining walls, now that, assuming prior to the CUP approval or when we were involved, that would have been dealt with and we didn't have any control. Now we do. So the question is that, and I think it's a two-pronged question, or two people can answer, is that what we just saw with the retaining wall being, assuming that the maximum distance is 15 feet, and then looking at that diagram, if somebody opens up the book and starts developing this project, that's what they're going to look at. They're going to say, I need to maintain 15 feet because building and safety is telling me to do that. Well, when they come in front of us, then we're going to say, you know what, you chopped off half of the hill and you plugged your building right on flat on there and you created a retaining wall. Question that I have is that, can we incorporate the retaining wall into the building, bring the building into so that it becomes the back of the building, and so basically it's nestled into the hill. So the first floor, let's assume hypothetically, the first floor is the retaining wall that is holding the earth. And then the second level, then we would have that 15-foot setback or certain conditions there.
Yeah, there are many options of where you place the retaining wall to create your 15-foot setback, which is kind of the catch basin side. Much the same way on a downhill slope, you can deepen your footings to get closer to the edge. On the uphill side, you can do structural alterations to your building that could even allow the building to be a retaining wall that creates the setback itself. You would not have any windows in that wall. It would be a solid mass, but it would be the back of the building, and that is an option.
So if we get a project and we force them to do that, we should be okay, and we should to maintain the hillside guidelines and other requirements.
And we do have some examples of buildings like that we'll be showing you.
Okay.
Can you go back to the first slide on the retaining wall, the front setback?
The
That one.
code?
Yeah. Here you say 5 feet and maximum 7. Where does the 18-inch retaining walls, front setback walls fall in play?
Now, the code is very specific when it comes to the example you have before you. It's a 5-foot maximum, 2 additional feet for decorative masonry. Code also allows an 18-inch maximum freeboard on top. But if you add the freeboard on top, the overall height would still be a maximum of 7 feet. So it's there's a little bit of a nuance to the code, unfortunately,
I know,
which
but
needs to be corrected, because technically by code, nothing should be greater than 7 feet.
But
if it's
again-
a cut condition in the front. And again, I want to make there's a saying in the planning department that all planners know: you can cut, but you cannot fill. So you cannot create a situation in which you have a wall and you backfill in the front setback. Okay, so just to make note of that, you are allowed essentially an 18-inch wall or planter wall above any existing grade. But if you do have a cut condition with a 5-foot wall, you can go up to 7-foot maximum if it's decorative, but any other time that you cut, you can only have an 18-inch maximum with freeboard or planter wall
This is
above.
retaining the existing slope, and when you
Retaining
cut
it.
is where the 18 inches comes in play. Because there's a maximum height for any fence walls or retaining wall, no more than 18 inches in the front setback.
Correct.
So how does that play with?
Again, unfortunately, this is where there's 2 code sections that are at opposite ends, but because this particular code section allows for an overall height of 7 feet,
Okay.
we would be able to grant that 7-foot overall height.
So 7 feet.
One of the goals that we have is to reduce retaining walls where possible. So we have a variety of methods that planning hearing officers have used to do that. We've looked at berming, use of split pads, going with a grade for things such as driveways, and also we've looked at landscaping alternatives for retaining walls. And not only retaining walls, but also handrails and guardrails. So when we look at a site, now we look, are retaining walls minimized? Is there a way to reduce the number of walls? And again, these are just things that we've seen out in the field. A lot of these are not permitted under code now. Again, we've had numerous years where we've had different iterations of hillside ordinances. So we're not saying anything is illegal or anything like that. We're just pointing out that when we look at plans, we look at it in terms of, are we really doing what's right for the neighborhood? Are we really doing what's minimizing impacts? So here's other examples. On the bottom, you can see what the slope used to look like. This was all graded at the same time. All the homes had a similar slope in the front yard. Then you look at the top, and someone's done some remodeling. So, again, not all these come before the board, but we just want to make you aware that these situations do exist. And there are other alternatives to the walls. There's another, even a small yard.
Laura, has there ever been a restriction on the square footage of retaining walls relative to the lot size or house size? I mean, I noticed some of these might be.
I'm not familiar with the restriction that would limit the number of, or amount of retaining walls to the size of a lot. One of the concerns that we have, especially in hillside lots, is that just how do pedestrians access a site? If you're using a driveway that's relatively shallow, it's easy to walk up, but a lot of these driveways are quite steep. How do people get there? So people need to keep in mind if you're looking at a site plan, if you do see pedestrian access, well, what would the drop be? Are we going to see retaining walls in the front so we can get people safely to the front door? Also, if you're having pedestrian access right next to a driveway, sometimes you would need to put in some landscaping, and sometimes people remove the landscaping that was there for a buffer. In terms of site planning, obviously code requirements and guidelines as well as building and safety requirements play a large part in site planning on hillsides. We also have the issue of setbacks versus upslope and downslope. We look at retaining walls. A lot of people use retaining walls not merely to build a site, but also to enhance a site. And by enhancement, I mean they're looking at putting in flatland yards, pools, especially now we're seeing a lot of people come in with a zero-edge pool. There's time to all have some form of a retaining wall. We also are looking at opportunities to use stepped pads. A question that came up, can you make part of a retaining wall part of the home? That's a way to reduce some of the impacts from retaining walls, particularly upon neighbors. And we also have an issue in hillsides with infrastructure. We really need to look at infrastructure up front, and you'll see some examples of where perhaps that hasn't occurred. And then our tools. What are our tools to do hillside policy? We have Glendale Municipal Code Section 3011-040. That's our residential standards. And as part of our residential standards, we have a hillside development review policy that has 5 considerations that we need to look at. In Title 16, we also have regulations relating to ridgeline, protected ridgelines, and blue line streams. And in your staff reports, if any of these issues come up, you'll see recommendations on those. Those are, again, recommendations that used to go to the planning hearing officers, and now you'll see them as part of your reports. So the hillside development policy, this is the key policy that we use. It requires that development shall be in keeping with the design objectives in the Glendale Municipal Code. The hillside design guidelines and landscape guidelines for hillside development is now adopted and may be amended from time to time by council. We also have development shall be compatible with surrounding neighborhoods in terms of size, scale, bulk, mass, roofline orientation, setbacks, and site layout. Site plans shall show preservation of prominent natural features, native vegetation, and open space in a manner compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, minimizing alteration of terrain necessary for development. We also have that site plans for development of property on steep slopes shall take into account the visual impact on surrounding properties, and that the architectural style and architectural elements of infill development shall be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And again, those are our considerations.
Stoller, I think these 5 items are extremely important, and it's great that you're pointing them out. They're, in essence, the hillside design development guidelines that we go with. And this is exactly what we try to analyze, right, as we're looking at these hillside projects that come in front of us. And when I was making that point earlier about the preliminary submittal, sometimes projects come before us that absolutely took the wrong turn and are placed totally at the wrong spot. And not only are they not terracing into the hillside, but they're actually creating a lot of mass and bulk, and they're turning into kind of something you would place in suburbia, but in the hillsides, right? Mm-hmm. And that's exactly when it becomes kind of difficult to work with an applicant like that, because they're so far along. Whereas on the preliminary stages, it would be much easier to comment and to save applicants time and money to, take a right approach.
Well, and as Tim was saying, that's part of the reason why, as a streamlining effort, if all of that authority is placed in one body, which would be the Design Review Board, it gives you a lot of flexibility to be able to deal with various site characteristics that perhaps your hands are tied. So this gives you more flexibility. Also, the code was amended to give you all the authority to do that. We also have the hillside design guidelines, which are part of the comprehensive design guidelines. And again, similar direction, follow topography, minimize landform alteration, that discourages creation of yards through use of retaining walls. It also encourages minimizing retaining walls, as well as some direction for landscaping materials. Due to the hillside, a lot of times fire and slope safety comes right into play also, and the types of designs and materials that can be used. And then there's a pretty recent change, actually, that occurred in design review. It has to do with privacy, so we'd like to point out those issues. I know you're familiar with them, but those are also in the code. As Vilya said, we have a saying, you can cut, but you can't fill, and so this is just an illustration of that issue.
Go back to that slide, please, Ms. Stoller. So if I have a house, I want to put a deck, fill that little triangle there with a retaining wall. You discourage that?
We would discourage it if you're building a retaining wall and then backfilling it, yes. If you cut,
Not for a habitable area, for a structure
Now again,
or a deck.
the slide that you see on the screen shows the condition in the front setback. So in the front setback, you would not be able to create a deck
Okay.
with the fill condition. In the rear, however, provided that your retaining walls meet the guidelines set forth, you would be able to go ahead and fill to
But if I
create
had
the
a
deck.
substantial setback in the front, I can't do that?
If you have a substantial, well,
If it's outside 50 feet.
if it's
you can.
outside 15 feet, then by code, it would be permitted, but again, that would be something that the staff would take into account when we're taking a look whether or not we could exempt it from the design review or not.
Because we've seen a couple of projects that face both sides of the street. Now you got the downhill side and the front, although it's the rear, but still, you know. Okay, thanks.
here's some examples that we had in the past. This was, again, before we had hillside review. Just the idea of, does a design minimize mass and bulk on a hillside? And does a home follow the topography? Driveways and access, the maximum driveway slopes are between 15 and 20%. We also have an issue sometimes when we review projects. We may look at it, may meet the zoning code. However, when we bring it to engineering, they'll discover there's a site distance problem at the street. So if we see that, we'll definitely point that out to you on any plans.
So,
And concern with pedestrian access and then also fire department access for long driveways.
so going back to the question that if we can change things, and you said that we can't really go beyond our preview. Like, for example, you know, some of these lots, R1, ROS lots, by the time you get to the area that you're going to minimize the amount of grading per se and reduce the amount of retaining wall and so forth, you may end up requiring more slope than what they have proposed, meaning like, you know, 21% or 21.5%, whatever the case may be. Is that something that we can look at and be able to work with, being able to reduce some of the grading and some of the retaining walls and other things that are more environmental issues than the slope that we're, I mean, 1 or 2% or whatever, the 10% leeway that we can give to the applicants will allow a reduced amount of impact to the.
Yeah, that again is a discretionary application that they would have to apply for that is not approved by this body. So the 10% that you're talking about is, I believe, an administrative exception, which is kind of like a minor variance. And like a variance, the board cannot, make its approval contingent upon another discretionary action that's decided by some other body.
So we cannot go beyond the zoning code requirements.
I mean, you could suggest that someone apply for that and return it for redesign, but you can't make it a condition.
I just wanted to point out, here's an example of a line of sight issue that we would have. This is a driveway that would be, someone would need to back out of the driveway. This might cause an issue for them to be able to see someone coming up the street. Then the other question we have, again, this was, I can't stress it enough, this was before our current design, hillside ordinance, but our retaining wall is really necessary for access to the site. Now, are we making best use of screening using landscaping? Are we putting retaining walls in the right-of-way, which we do not allow retaining walls to be in the right-of-way generally. Are we putting a driveway in a location that really minimizes the location of walls? Are we putting it at the top of the slope where perhaps we don't need to have such a large retaining wall?
It's an old house there.
Is this a very old house?
Yeah, I know that one.
But some of these same issues come up because you're going to see development on lots that have not been developed on before. These are just ideas to keep in mind. These are things that we see out in the field. We're not saying this is permitted now, but just an idea of this is why the laws were changed and this is why we have these hillside standards. We're always concerned if we're creating like a corridor driveway, do we really need all the retaining walls, or is there ability to reduce them? Also, we know there is a need, just a practical need, that we need to make sure that there's trash areas where people can store their trash outside of the public right-of-way, outside of the front of the home. People design nice walls, nice houses, and then they put the trash in front of them, especially if they're creating an area that's for permanent storage. And the issue of just drainage, and infrastructure, one of the issues we have as planning hearing officers is cross-lot drainage. Are all the needed infrastructures or improvements shown on the plans that you see? Are there going to be additional walls or devices near catch basins that aren't shown on the plans that will show up later? Is all the drainage directed to the street, or is it going under a protected tree? And are all the NPDES or stormwater mitigation measures shown on the plan that would be required? Is there something that's missing from the plan, essentially omissions? You'll see a lot of those pointed out in the comments that come from other departments that will be attached to your reports. And again, in terms of site plan, will there be infrastructure and public view? In this case, we have public infrastructure. Or will private infrastructure be in view? In this case, we didn't look at drainage from the backyard, and apparently it goes down the street too. So these are things that if we had addressed it during the site plan, we could have made them put it down the driveway or something so it wouldn't impact the street or the neighborhood. And just environmental issues in general, protected trees, blue line streams, protected ridge lines, those will be mentioned in the report if they're affecting the property you're going to be reviewing. So here's examples of where you have a house that was built into the hill. Because they stepped it in, they reduced some of the retaining walls to the rear of the house. They protected oak trees. And you'll see this part of the house or property looks like it was quite well designed. But then when you look at it from the street level, this is one of the concerns we have is when people put in, essentially, they do cutting, they put in a backyard, but then by the time you put railing on top, you get quite a massing on the public street. And so we just want to point that out, that depending on where a yard is, it could have a big impact on neighbors. And here we have a site plan. That's a more recent site plan. It has a split pad. It took account of issues of tree preservation and privacy. And you can see it stepped into the hill. And here's another example of a project where the hillside project stepped into the hill. And so that concludes staff presentation. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer.
I had a question on the zoning code says that your retaining walls have to be decorative.
Yes.
And this question has come up. So if I'm designing a Spanish house and I want to do my walls stucco, I can't do it?
I would leave that to the designer.
That's our current interpretation of the code, is that stucco is not an appropriate decorative material. Personally, I would lobby for, in a case where it's appropriate to the style of the house, that be amended in the future or changed in the future. We also hear people talk about waterproofing issues with stucco on block, but I know that's not insurmountable. So, but as of now, we can't allow it.
Does that conclude staff's presentation? Well, that was extremely helpful, especially that this package that you put together with all the pictures and whatnot. It's a great tool for us to keep, and of course, everybody watching in the audience and at home, I think, learned a lot from this. So that's wonderful. We appreciate feedback.
Quick question, when is this active? Is it active now? I mean, are we going to,
The ordinance took effect on Monday.
Correct.
And are there other CUP files that are in the system that are going to go through the old methodology, or is everything basically going to come to Design Review Board moving forward?
Those applications that were submitted for a CUP under the old rules have the ability to have the applicant submit a letter in writing to request to be reviewed under the new rules. So essentially, no CUP would be required. They can strictly just go to the Design Review Board state
I see. Okay.
and request a
So we're going to see these files, cases fairly quickly then, I would assume.
Probably, yes.
Okay. Very good.
They're just a few, less than a handful, actually.
That's right. It's going to get interesting.
Yeah, also, just, I believe that there were a few members of the audience that wish to comment.
Okay. Mr. Foy?
Let me just talk a little further about one code question that came up. I think it was Mr. Mardian who raised it about a retaining wall and freeboard. The height limits in the code are for retaining walls. Since freeboard doesn't retain, that extra 18 inches is in addition to the height limits in the code. So you could go a total of 8.5 feet in the front setback.
but again, that's dictated by a soils engineer or structural engineer, so the freeboard is, how do we control that? If the engineer or the soils engineer requires a certain, based on the slope of the lot, and they say that you need to have a 30-inch or a 36-inch freeboard, how does that come into play?
There's probably then alternate forms of grading that could be, alternate ways of grading that could be, that could eliminate the need for so much
So
freeboard.
18 inches is strictly for freeboard or freestanding
Yeah.
in the front setback.
Also, just to make note of sometimes a condition that the planners see at the planning counter where individuals want to essentially do a cut condition and provide that 5 or 7 foot high retaining wall. If the building code requires an additional railing on top, and this is a self-imposed type of not hardship, but a self-imposed situation. Unfortunately, the planning department is tied in terms of allowing that retaining wall or the additional railing on top. So we would, at that point in time, request that the applicant look at alternative.
Well, the code does
Designs.
say you can put railing on top of for ramp or a stair. It doesn't say that it's
Correct. If it's
this-
not a specifically designed retaining wall in the front, though.
right. So it does say that. So if there's something that but my biggest concern, and I'm going to be open in public and say this the first time, a lot of the projects that come in front of us, it has not gone through any of the departments for their review, and so what I'm hearing now is that because of the CUP condition, they will be routed through the building and safety and public works and other departments, correct?
Yes, for these cases that used to require a CUP.
Okay. But again, the rest of the projects, it would be up to the applicant for them to run it through the different departments.
And with this new system where there's no longer the CUP and these cases are coming in front of us as far as hillside projects are concerned, would a soil report be a requirement for the submittal, or is that not part of the required checklist?
It often is. It's really, I think, at the call of the city engineer.
Okay. So there will most probably be scenarios where a soil report will be attached to the case where some of these
Very
issues...
often, yes. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I want to ask Mr. So the height of the retaining wall could go up to 8.5. You just said that.
No, not retaining.
No, the freeboard.
Yes, with the
7
retaining
plus-
plus freeboard.
So
Yes.
7 plus, okay. Yeah.
So we can have an 8.5-foot wall in the front setback with the freeboard.
That's the way the code's written, yeah.
All right.
That's a code maximum.
So
You don't have to grant that
No, I
necessarily.
understand. I can just see it coming, stacking.
You see the tidal wave coming,
Oh,
right?
man.
All right, so with that, I assume we're going to conclude the staff's presentation. I know there's some members of the audience that would like to speak on this behalf. You don't need to, but if you would like to, you're welcome to. I think we were going to limit it to, say, 3 minutes. And I don't have any speaker cards, but you for sure could come up, introduce yourself, and then fill out a card and hand it to staff afterwards. Mr. Hagopian, you're the first one. Welcome.
Thank you, and I appreciate this meeting. It's a rare opportunity for me to express my many years of experience, and I am one of those architects that have designed many hillside projects in city of Glendale. Like,
And on that note, your name for the record. I know.
my name is Edward Hagopian.
Wonderful.
Yeah, okay. I think Mr. Mardian and Mr. Malakian, they have done a lot of also hillside projects, and those who have done a lot of this kind of projects, for them this, if you compare this to a dictionary of hillside, it barely goes from A to B. How about C, D, E, F, G, H, all the way to X, Y, Z? There are a lot of issues that needs to be discussed. Years ago, like I don't remember exactly, 6-7 years ago, the previous planning director organized a workshop. Architects, developers, homeowners association people, city staff. This is a kind of good atmosphere and environment that we can pass our experience, share our experience. People like me, there are a lot of them in this city. I am one of the small ones, of course. They can share their thoughts and their experiences with everybody in a peaceful environment rather than to come in design board hearings and kind of having arguments with each other, with those association people or with people who object. I will tell maybe 1 or 2 or 3 examples. I have heard a lot of times that people, those who object to a project, they say, why don't you build one-story house in uphill? It's impossible. Do it, and then you will see that it's impossible to build one-story building in a slope of more than 40% or 50%. Most of these things that you are showing here, these are not slopes. This is 10, 15, 20%, 25%. I have studied this for a long time. After 27%, things change. You have to have, I'm glad that an engineer was here and he explained that we need a wall on the back. Anyway, there is a lot to say. I cannot in a 3-minute explain the experiences that I have gone through. Like, the slopes are not always like this. Sometimes they are like this. You enter to the property in this direction. In one of my design board projects, one of the members of the design board suggested that I design a subterranean garage. Totally impossible. So, what I am suggesting here tonight, again I'm repeating myself, that to have a meeting, a workshop, several days, several times, so that we can share all these experiences, many experiences, and come up with some kind of solutions before the owners spend tens of thousands of dollars and end up with nothing. That's the money of this country. That's money of these people here, and shouldn't be wasted like that.
All right. Well, that concludes the 3 minutes. But I would really encourage, by the way, everybody in the audience and all the architects to really utilize that preliminary submittal. It's the best way to have that dialogue before a law, not just for that case or what other case, just in general. I think it's a great utility it's a great mechanism to be utilized in our process.
Well, I believe before we do that, we have to study this up to a point that we really open up, crack all the issues that are involved in hillside, and have something that is complete, a good vocabulary, a good dictionary that will save time, your time, our time, owner's money, and we can get to results much better and faster and directly. I cannot, as I said, I cannot explain these things in 3 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes. There is a lot to talk about these hillside issues. In a lot that has more than 45%, those things that you said here doesn't work at all.
Well, we do have to respect the time.
Thank you.
Yep. Are there others in the audience that would like to speak on this item? Mr. Marcosi?
Good evening. My name is Sako Marcusi with All Judge Marcusi Architects. Just a couple of items. Do I understand correctly if a hillside project does not trigger a CUP condition, then it will not be reviewed by different departments when it's submitted to the for design review?
That's correct.
That's correct. So,
Except for the city arborist.
except for the city arborist. Okay. And the
What was
second
the question? I'm sorry, I missed
Well, the
the question.
question was that you look at the hillside design review package differently. If it triggers, let's say if you have 1,500 cubic yards grading or more, then automatically it's routed through all the departments. They comment on your project. I think it's very constructive. But if you have a project which your slope is less than 50% and you don't have grading over 1,500, then it's just a simple review by planning staff and it comes to you. So you don't have all that background information to make a better decision on the project because you have all this information coming from engineering, traffic, whatever, So you don't have that. I think it would be a good idea to have that for a hillside project, That's just my I opinion. think it would be a good idea for any project. For any project. And just to take a page from what Pasadena does, as you suggested, all the projects they have what they call a preliminary design review submittal, which is several $100s. Like
Right. Very affordable.
I have 2-3 projects, 20, 30 units. I think $700 or $800 is the fee that you pay. You submit the package, and it's reviewed with the commission. It's just like it's not publicized. It's not a public hearing, but it's a hearing just like as if it's a public hearing. You have the commission and you have your project. You present, and the comments come back, and then from there you put the package together and submit to the city for a design review. I think that'd be a good idea to have that, especially on the hillside projects. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there others that would like to speak on this subject? If so, come on up and then fill out a card. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Good.
Myrna Stanley, Verdugo Woodlands West Homeowners Association, and I want to thank staff and you for all the time you've put into this. And I have to tell you, I don't think anybody envies you. This is a lot more study and responsibility on your shoulders, and good luck. I would like to. I know. Well, especially with all the easy hillside projects have been, they're done. Wait till you see the ones that are coming up. I just want to, if a recommendation and to stress on you, the importance is from our standpoint that you make site visits. They're so critical, but we see things that you don't see simply because we're in the neighborhood and we live there a lot. And many times, especially on the hillside, it isn't just from the front or the side. You actually have to go into the neighbor's yard and look at those story poles and understand why, when they come before you, why they say what they say. And the other thing is another suggestion, if I may, that not to be shy to impose conditions, because when you say you ought to do this, you ought to do, and it's a consideration. Well, they consider it thanks and no thanks. But if you put a condition, you really believe in what recommending will make it a better project, then go ahead and condition it. Because when we're in the audience and the neighbors, we're just in limbo. We don't know what to think. If it's a condition, it really doesn't have any feet. So anyway, thanks again. We really appreciate it, and good luck.
Thank you. Are there others in the audience that would like to speak on this item? Yes, please. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Ramal Lajajian. I'm an architect here, City of Glendale. As speakers before me, the architects, Mr. Hagopian and my partner, Sako Marcusi, said, there's no easy projects on a hillside. And I'm only here to say that I want to encourage you to use your creativity when you look at the projects. Every single project is going to be different because hillsides are different. It's a very sensitive area. I want to thank the staff. You know, I've been part of the Streamline Committee trying to streamline the DRB process, and I did support the City Council for approving this ordinance. So I wish you best of the luck, but I think every single project you folks have to, or the ones that comes after you, they have to take a very good care of it and take a good close look at it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Are there others that would like to speak on this item? Okay. With that, I'd like to close the public portion again. Mr. Foy, is there some items that would like to adjourn with on this topic? Oh, well,
No, that was just...
that was the last one, yes.
No, just we just wanted to give you a preparation for what you'll see coming, and we look forward to your feedback as you see the staff reports and give us feedback on what we should include or emphasize more, and as well as what sorts of conditions this board is wants us to encourage applicants to design to.
And as you mentioned, it's wonderful that the city's considering the budget right now, because it's something that could be maybe thought of, as I know you will, on that preliminary submittal, if there's a way we could give a break on the fees, where it becomes less inhibitive for the public to utilize that portion of the code.
I think having said that, it's a very good point, and also thinking about the budget, I really think that we need to have a process, like a plan review process, that all the departments get involved and let the applicants decide if they want to spend the extra money and for their addition or for their whatever the case may be, because a lot of times in a small project, if it's not a CUP project, that it is going to be forced going through the public works and having the building is safety, or reviewing the retaining walls and other conditions. The applicant will have the choice of going through that process and having all the departments doing the preliminary review and giving the feedback, and therefore what we're going to be looking at and approving most likely will be built accordingly once they go through the process of the plan check process. A lot of times we get projects here that we're hoping, and I can remember several projects that came in front of us, and everybody would come and they're concerned about the drainage and they're concerned about how this whole thing is going to be worked, and our answer is, well, it's not in our purview, and they're going to go through the public works and they're going to have that reviewed, and you're going to end up having a pipe on the side of the hill coming down, and so. If that was probably a one-bedroom addition or whatever the case was, and they didn't have to go through that process. But I think if we do have that option there, and if we allow people, and city can recuperate some money by charging people, I'll let them go through the main process.
Especially if they choose to.
Yeah.
I think for sensitive projects, they should, especially when there's neighbors are concerned and privacy views and all that. We've seen it before. That they object and they get into the picture too late until there's a notice.
The key is to have one person per department reviewing it, giving some written documents, something there, so that they can kind of fall back on, and not having multiple people looking at it within the department and giving different feedback. So once we're reviewing the plans, we know that it's been reviewed by everyone, and we know that, the things that we're going to change is more aesthetic rather than code issues and not being able to design their footings and push the retaining walls back just because it doesn't meet the building and safety issues.
Yeah.
Speed review.
I'd like to ask something to staff, because we've had a couple of cases where they had CUPs and there was a floor area dictated in the conditions of approval. How do you dictate square footage when it comes to approvals like that?
Well, I remember one recent case where the hearing officer was attempting to have the size of the home be similar to the size of other homes in there. But I think your question really illustrates some of the concerns we have with this whole process and our impetus for suggesting this sort of change. That a planning hearing officer didn't want to say, you always just say no and deny a CUP and have it go through appeal process. We were trying to develop parameters that would give some flexibility and then still give the architect room and the board here, room to maneuver within that. And that it turned out just to be a very difficult thing to do, to, say yes with kind of a loose yes to a CUP request and let the board hammer it out more, but then there were always solutions that weren't obvious at the time, or the architect would have different ideas by the time he got to DRB. So, your question points out, why we prefer the process that we're starting now.
Well, the other question I have that has happened too, we don't want to be a board dictating style. I think that's wrong to dictate a style, whether it's a hillside, whether it's any location. If somebody chooses to design a Spanish or Tuscany or modern, so be it, as long as it fits into this architecture. Because we had another case where, past board said, don't do Spanish. And I feel that is not our call, really. If he can make it work, so be it. Because I don't want to tell applicants or homeowners that, you can't have a Spanish home or you can't have a modern home. If he can make it fit, so be it. He can do it.
One other thought has come to mind. During the process of going through a brand new project on a hillside, one of the normal processes would have been to go through the CUP and then apply for the, show the grading and other conditions that were there, and then based on what preliminary design of the project was going to be. And then at that point, you would be able to have the option of going through the design. Correct me if I'm wrong. You would have the choice of going through design review, or part of that approval of the grading part of the requirement by the Public Works, they would have to bond and place some sort of a guarantee of what they were going to do. At some cases, they would actually flatten the land and build the retaining walls and other conditions in order for them to get that. But at some point, you would end up having this flat land, and I'm particularly talking about a property up by up north by Montrose area. There was an area that I don't want to mention the developer's name, but there was a parcel that was flattened. The retaining walls were placed, and it was just sitting there, and they put it in the market. I'm just wondering, going through this process of doing a brand new project on a hillside, and then we go through the CUP process, how's that going to be involved? Do they need to get the grading approved separately after we give them the approval, or the whole thing gets approved together? And we don't give the option of the clients to grade, flatten, and then go back, and then when they come back with another project, that they're just using this flat ground.
Yeah, my understanding is that what you'll be reviewing and what the hearing officer reviewed is a grading plan. They don't actually issue a grading permit until the building permit is issued. At least that's the way it works now. I can't speak to how it worked 15 or 20 years ago.
With the exception of a large subdivision.
Well, we haven't had any large subdivisions in the 10 years I've been here, so I can't speak to that. This CUP requirement was actually put in place 20 years ago when design review was just in its infancy. And I think that's why there was so much invested in the CUP process, was because, design review resembled nothing like what the board does now.
Okay. Well, this was most informative, very helpful. I take it staff has concluded its presentation. It seems as though the audience has certainly opined on the matter as well. So with that, then, I'd like to move on to approval of the minutes from the January 23rd meeting, if that's okay with staff.
The minutes of January 23rd, all board members were present except for Mr. Malikian. So
I would move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Palmer, a second by Board Member Mardian. Roll call, Board Member Sarkisian?
Yes.
Board Member Mardian?
Yes.
Board Member Palmer?
Yes.
Chairman Simonian?
Yes.
Motion passes to approve the minutes of January 23rd. Any other
No?
announcements?
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Thank you.
to 8861.
Brand Library and Art Center is preserving the past and coming into the future. Amazing transformations. Beautiful restoration. A return to form. Watch the remarkable transformations and renovations in progress